Commitment to community. Today there are several statements about how to understand our relationship with God and with one another. All throughout all of the readings, God is teaching us how to understand our relationship with God and with one another. And I would phrase it with commitment to community. The beautiful Beatitudes, the gifts that God bestows upon the suffering, the hungry, the grieving, those who are seeking justice, those who are persecuted. All the blessings that God pours upon those. First of all, it's important to know that God sees all suffering. The suffering that is visible and can make someone seem or feel like an outcast. God sees that suffering. And God looks to those who are outcasts, reaches out to those who feel like they're an outcast, and to feel like they are left out, to bring them back in, and to help them to feel connected once again. Secondly, when God sees someone who is suffering, God also makes sure that they know that they're not alone. Especially when God reaches out to say that I am with you, but God also sends others to make sure that that person knows that they are not alone. God also sees quiet suffering, that suffering that's oftentimes carried silently, the suffering that sometimes no one else knows or maybe only a few people know is a struggle in someone's life. You see, nothing is kept secret from God. Nothing is kept away from God. Nothing is hidden. And nothing that we think that we can hide would ever scare or run away God from our lives. I invite you to picture the most gracious person you know. Bring that person to mind and know that that person is just a glimpse of the graciousness of God. Think about a time when that person has been gracious to you, something they've said, something they've done that's just been a gift at just the right time. And again, know that that is just a glimpse of the kindness, the openness, and graciousness of God. God's commitment to community tells you that nothing separates you from God's love. And those who suffer, God knows their need and blesses their need. Yesterday I was listening to the Moth Radio Hour, and there was a story of a man who was without work. He was pretty down and just decided that maybe a good roast beef sandwich would help him to feel a little better on that day. So he went down to a local market and he took the number for the butcher so he could get some fresh roast beef to go home and make a roast beef sandwich. The person in front of him happened to have a long conversation with the butcher, seemed to have ordered more than one person could have ever eaten. And then when it was his turn, the butcher accidentally hit 2 numbers in a row, skipping his number. The next person stepped up to get his order, and this man said, "No, wait a minute, he missed my number. And I did wait very patiently. I'd just like some fresh roast beef, please." So the butcher did take his order, took his number, gave him the roast beef, and he headed out the door. As he passed out the door, one of the ladies there shook her finger at him and said, "You need to be a little more respectful around here. You don't understand. The butcher's mother has just started dialysis, and she is very ill." Well, the man at first was a little miffed, as you can imagine, thinking, "Oh, look, all I did was ask for my own turn." But the more he walked and the more he ate his own roast beef sandwich in his own home, the more he thought about this poor butcher who must be going through a hard time as his mother's ill. So he decided to look up in the phone book the number of the grocer and called up and asked to talk to the butcher. The butcher got on the phone and he said, explained to him who he was. "Oh yes, I remember you," said the butcher. He apologized for what he had said and asked him about his mother, and he told him. And then it came out that this man who was going to just get some meat for a sandwich was without work, and the butcher then encouraged him, and they end up having this long conversation. And after a while, the butcher finally said, "I probably should get off the phone. There's quite a lineup of people who'd like things from me." The man said he went back several days a week, sometimes not even to get anything. Well, not to get anything to eat, that is, but to get words of encouragement. And he and this butcher became friends. It's quite a story, I think, a story of a commitment to community. No one would have wanted this man to be without a job. No one would have wanted this butcher to have his mother's be ill and to have to go into dialysis. But God put these two people together in an unexpected way, which included the woman who wagged her finger at the man, in order that they could encourage and support one another. The man ended his story by saying, "I've had a job now for 1.5 years, and it's going well. I don't get to the butcher as often as I did when I was without work, but I try to get there every Saturday to say hello, and yes, every once in a while order some good roast beef for a fresh roast beef sandwich." Have any of you heard of the park in River Falls called the Tri-Angels Park? Yeah, I bet you've been there and played, right? Have you taken your kids there? Not yet. It has all kinds of bright colors and interesting things to climb up and see. There's even musical instruments there. It's a beautiful park. It's just on the other side of, if you go underneath the overpass, on the way into town, the hospital's on this side of the overpass, and then there's a ball field, and there's this Tri-Angels Park. That park would never have been there if it wasn't for this tragedy that happened several years ago, relatively recently, but long enough ago that some people maybe don't remember. The terrible incident where the father came back to town and killed his 3 daughters, all in the same evening. Pretty scary and pretty tragic situation. Now, God didn't want to have such a tragedy happen, not for those little girls, not for their mother, and not even for the father who is now having to spend time in prison for what he had done. But God is able to bring people together, to bring a community together, to bring strangers and friends together to build a park that will outlive the memory of these 3 little girls. To bring a park that brings joy and laughter and fun for parents and grandparents, for siblings to spend time and friends to enjoy together. In fact, soon there'll be a park like that built in Prescott as families who've had children die unexpectedly and in tragic ways come together to build such a park with beautiful colors and beautiful ways to play together with friends and family and parents and grandparents. God has a commitment to community. And that commitment to community doesn't end with God. That commitment to community becomes our calling to reach out with love and care when someone else is in need. God talks about it this way: to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. radio interview from Iowa, guess what that was about, came up this week. In the midst of this interview, all of a sudden, my ears perked up a little bit as they shared that this mom had a 30-year-old son who had some mental health issues. She said during the interview that it was her Catholic faith that taught her that Jesus never left anyone as an outcast, that Jesus was always caring for those on the edge of society and working to bring them back in, working to include them again. She shared that it was the work of Jesus that we are all called to do, to welcome and to care for those on the edge of society. It wasn't a Christian or a Catholic radio station, and if you didn't catch it, it was really all about politics. Yet her story and her words were the best sermon I've heard in a long time. Her story and her words were about how her faith had taught her to treat others, treat those who oftentimes feel like an outcast. No one would have wanted to have any of these tragedies happen. No one would have wanted that young 30-year-old to have mental health issues, or a mother to have to worry about him, or to even see him feel or be an outcast. No one would have wanted a man to lose a job. No one would have wanted another man's mother to be suffering and having to go on dialysis. No one would have wanted to have 3 girls die. No one, especially not God. But when such tragedies do happen, people come together. Communities. It's a commitment to community that God has to say that I'm going to bless those who are mourning, bless those who are suffering, and I'm going to call you to be a blessing to others. God has made that commitment with you so that you know you always have someone with you. Even if you feel alone, even if you feel like what's heavy on your heart God doesn't care about or listen to, God is there. Sometimes seems very quiet, but God is there. And God has called you to make that same commitment with one another, to be in a commitment of community, to reach out when you're in need, and when you have the blessing of joy or time or kind word or smile or even more, to give what you have as a blessing to others. Treat one another with kindness. God declares his love for us so that we can share love with others and a commitment to community. Amen.